The question that we have on the table before us is biblical creation intellectually sustainable? In my own experience, that has been largely answered by evolutionists in the negative based on what they consider to be this vast body of evidence that they have supposedly supporting evolution, which I feel really, upon closer examination, could really be lumped into the bucket of data that can support either a creation or an evolution model, but no attempt is made by the evolutionists to fit into the creation model or even to understand the creation model. So they simply say it supports evolution. And for people that are unexperienced or untrained with that, they run into the problem that they have no way to counter that. They don't know how to think about that. It just seems like they've got this overwhelming data bank to try to oppose, and they start looking like knuckle-driving troglodytes if they don't agree with the evolutionists. So my question would be, how do we respond to that as Christians?
Well, I think we find sometimes in the theological realm, we have a lot of theologians who are willing to adapt to the evolutionary model and other models, other scientific models a little prematurely, and that doesn't seem to bode well for many of the theologians. We have a number of examples, even archaeologically, which people would consider a much harder science, where they rapidly adapted to a prevailing scientific view and actually found out through greater research, lengthier research, that the prevailing scientific view was wrong, incorrect, and that with the discovery of new evidence, new information, actually the biblical perspective was correct. And a classic example of that is the Mesha Stela, Moabite stone as well, where you have proof of the existence of some of the ancient kings of Israel that for a period of time science said, no, that's not possible, these guys didn't really exist.
From a biological viewpoint, David, what do you think?
Well, I think one of the big problems that we have within the Christian realm is that many Christians don't even know that creationists have models. And so when they hear about a lot of the evidence that's being used to support an evolutionary model, they actually think that that's all wrong. It couldn't be right. And so when you talk about the idea that you can look at that data from a different perspective and actually support a different model, that's foreign to many people. And so one of the things I think would be helpful to Christians is to inform them about these other models and then show them how the data fits those models, because it fits really well. And all the evidence that's used to support things like classifications, which tend to be evolutionary based, can use the same thing to support the idea of biblical kinds. And that's really a good example that I think a lot of people should be aware of. And it's one of the things that we help our students here.
I think another factor, you were talking about evidence, is just to help people understand that nobody comes to evidence just sort of entirely objective. Everybody has presuppositions that guide how they look at evidence, how they handle evidence. So anything we can do to sort of push back to that level as to where does your worldview actually begin and what is the foundation on which you're evaluating the evidence will be helpful to advance, the discussion.
Yeah, the scientific method does depend upon direct observation as well as the application of logic, but you can't observe directly what happened at creation, since none of us were really there except for the one eyewitness that left a record for us in the Bible.
But so much of what we have in science is actually taken by someone who did observe it and passed on to people who either will never observe it themselves personally or can't observe it. And yet we actually ask students, we invite students to believe that. And then we'll turn around here and take a God who is I would call him a perfect scientific observer. He's in all places at all times with all capacities, perfect scientific observer, perfect mind, and communicates perfectly to his people, and we exclude it. It's almost like preemptively we shut his testimony out of the courtroom, and that is not only, in some sense, legally not viable, it's intellectually inappropriate to exclude that kind of testimony of an expert witness.
Right, and to the point that you were making earlier, that a lot of times in theology they change what they do because of evidence. Within science, they do the same thing. New evidence comes along and old models get pushed away. But a lot of times it's those old models that were supporting some type of theology at the time. One of the things that's often overlooked, in my opinion, is the idea that scientific theories change very rapidly. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the theories that are supporting the evolutionary point of view right now will have to change as well as new evidence comes in, because that's what we see year after year after year. So some big models that have changed are even something that are so well known at the time, they're called dogmas,
Right.
like the central dogma of cellular biology, which is demonstrated to be not true in a lot of cases.
Or you have some pretty aggressive intramural debates like Gould calling into question uniformitarianism as a for instance. You know, they set up uniformitarianism and then he comes along and says, no, the evidence actually disputes this supposedly scientific truism.
Right, and along those lines too, catastrophism is now a reigning paradigm because we have so many evidences of catastrophes that have taken place. But when you ask, well, what about a global catastrophe? Oh no, that couldn't take place, even though the evidence for that is pretty clear when you expect to see it.
So the question itself actually depends or revolves around both the certain philosophical aspects as well as evidential aspects. And we need to prepare our students to address both, I think, as we continue our education here at Bob Jones.